I'd like to welcome you all. Okay, let's wait till we get going. I'd like to welcome all of you who figured out the time difference and are able to attend today. We're doing something quite different than what we've done up to this point with the Gemquest programming, is that we've been trying to keep people on the leading edge of information on every one of the subjects that we've covered by using the world's leading experts who are on the leading edge. But today we're stepping backwards in a way, in a sense, and we're looking at history, and we're looking at someone who's an expert in the history, particularly of one of the most marketable gems in the world right now, the diamond. I'd like to give you a little bit of an introduction about our guest, so you have an idea of what you're getting. Scott Sucher is a retired Air Force combat search and rescue special operations instructor, pilot, and was chief of air operations in Kuwait for Operations Southern Watch. He is an knowledge expert in history and cutting of famous historical diamonds, having published articles on the French blue, Tavernier blue, Kohinoor diamonds and gems, and gemology. Revue de gemology in France, plus a few others. Scott was a featured gem expert and gem cutter in the Discovery Channel documentary Unsolved History, The Hope Diamond, that first aired in March 2005, and in 2010, National Geographic program, The Secrets of the Hope Diamond, with a significant airtime in both programs. As a result of the Discovery Channel filming, he was privileged to be alone in the Smithsonian vault with the unset Hope Diamond. And I haven't had that privilege to date because it's only been unset a few times in its history. Um, and the Blue Heart Diamond and Napoleon's necklace. He was the keynote speaker for GIA's 2011 John Sinkankas Diamond Symposium, and his work is on permanent exhibit in many museums. It can be found in reference books published by JTV, Yale University, and others. So he comes with a few creds, and obviously has served, and we acknowledge your service, Scott. So that's something we always need to show respect for, because it's not necessarily one of the easy jobs in the world. But aside from that, like John Sinkankas, you were in the forces, and yet you managed to grow a knowledge and an expertise in a field not everybody knows about. And many who are lucky have actually seen some of your copies of the world's famous diamonds. So I'd like to welcome Scott to our midst in the Gemquest programming, and I hope that you enjoy what he has to share with us today. Scott.
All right. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're at. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you wonderfully.
Okay, very good, because I just had to change off of my headset for whatever reason. All right. I want to thank everybody for showing up during my day, possibly your evening. You can see what we're going to talk about. Generally, Ray's talks focus on the latest developments of what's happening in the gem and jewelry industry. I, however, like to be different, so I'm going to send you back 3,000 years, where we started the industrial use of diamonds, and then carry you up to the early 20th century as far as the evolution of diamond cutting. Here is my contact information and my website. If anybody would like to get a hold of me, and my email is scott at either museumdiamonds.com or scottthestonecutter.com. The journey is going to begin about 3,000 years ago with the industrial use of diamonds. And then we're going to talk about when diamonds started to be used for jewelry use. And then we'll go through the past 700, 800 years of development. Now we have computers, but what about then? If you take nothing else away from this discussion, marvel at what the old time diamond cutters did with what they had, creating these remarkable pieces of art. And keep in the back of your mind that most of your world's famous diamonds were cut long before the concept of optics was fully understood, which would be around 1710 or 1720 or so. So if nothing else, appreciate the skill and difficulty what these folks had to go through in creating the historic diamonds. Okay, we're going to talk about the historical use of diamonds and the effects of trade that it had on the historical diamond scene. And then we'll talk about diamond cutting evolution. Some of the extraneous points. Please do not get hung up on the names of the different cuts. I am a gem cutter. I call some of the patterns by certain names. A jeweler may have the same pattern by yet another name. Same thing for a gemologist or even an appraiser. So as Winston Churchill once said, we are all people separated by a common language. So do not get hung up on the different types and names of cuts. And also do not get bothered about the dates too much. I can show you in reference books where in one paragraph they will say that this cut was developed in the 14th century. And yet in the very next paragraph, they'll start talking about the 1400s and that cut. Unfortunately, the 14th century and the 1400s are 100 years apart. So even within the same reference, they are not consistent in their dates. What I do want you to understand is the relative order, the progression, the chronological progression of one cut or one development to the next. All right, we'll go back to 1000 BC, 3,000 years ago. This is a photomicrograph of a hole bored through a sapphire bead. Ask yourself, what can you use to bore a hole through a sapphire with? And the only thing that can be answered is a diamond. Now, what we anticipate them having used is this device right here. Basically, you have a piece of wood and using some adhesive material, whether it be tar or an animal glue, embed two small pieces of diamond at the end of it. And then as it shows in an Egyptian tomb, a bow saw to basically use the drill. We don't know what this individual is boring through. Could be wood, could be stone, but this at least shows you how you could bore a bead, a sapphire bead, using a diamond bit back then. All right, for those of you that look in the Bible, Jeremiah 17:1, written approximately 600 BC. You can see what I have written here. And I'm sure that some of you in the crowd know Hebrew better than I do. And if there's any discussion on this point, I am wide open for that discussion. Okay, fair enough. 300 BC, the Arthashastra. This was an economic treatise on ancient India, a very, very large treatise. It covered just about everything that had to do with the economics of India approximately 2,300 years ago. And in it, it talked about the diamond, how they came out of the ground, these beautiful octahedral crystals that were unalterable. Nothing would phase them. As a result, they had mystical properties. So much so that it was up to the Europeans. Most folks consider it was up to the Europeans to invent diamond cutting because the Indians had a prohibition against altering these perfect crystals. Why? Because trying to alter something that's perfect that you consider a gift from your gods is kind of spitting in the eye of your gods if you're saying, hey, what you gave me isn't that good and I think I can improve it. That takes a certain amount of guts or a line that they just didn't want to cross. Around 50 AD, Pliny wrote of diamonds. We know they were used for engraving in ancient Rome. This is a sapphire bust dated to the 1st century AD. And again, what's the only thing that you can carve and polish sapphire with? We do know they were used, diamonds were used as limited jewelry use. Here you see 2 diamond octahedra set in a 1st century Roman ring. Now, prior to 1200 AD, diamonds in Europe were exceedingly scarce. India was pretty much your only source of diamonds prior to 1720. There were a few coming out of Borneo, but not enough to make any real impact. So just about every diamond came out of India, and you can see the travel distance involved here. By the way, ask yourself the question, do I really want to travel this route even now? I mean, just about every point across the map at this point has some kind of a war or conflagration going on. There were also Indian restrictions on the export of diamonds. Anything greater than 10 carats belonged to the Maharaja. And anything perfect, regardless of what size, still belonged to him. And it is written that the penalty for violating this was that you would be tied to the stake and they would set the hunting dogs upon you. And these hunting dogs would not have been fed for approximately 3 days. So they were a little bit on the hungry side. So a rather gruesome end if you were caught. And it probably served as a deterrent for except the most stupid or most brave to export diamonds out of India back then. Now, there are some people that feel that this 10th century woodcut shows that diamond cutting started in around 900 AD in Europe. But if you read the verbiage that goes with it, the stones were handheld. Stones were preformed on a piece of sandstone with a lead table for forming, and for polishing, they would use a goat skin with brick dust and saliva as a lubricant. We'll take a look at these items. Any of these being able to be used on diamond? Not a chance. However, we do know that around 1200 AD, diamonds were starting to be cut. They were handheld. They would preform them using coarse diamond on an iron plate, polish using diamond dust on an iron plate. And I will concede the point, being a gem cutter myself, that yeah, maybe a little bit of saliva was involved. Now, one of the ongoing questions I have always had, how did they separate the different diamond grits? Back then, you would beat the heck out of a non-gem diamond, and you end up with this pile of diamond dust of various grit sizes. But how did they separate them? There's nothing written. Obviously, you need coarse diamond for grinding and fine diamond for polishing. What I personally think is that they probably put the smashings inside a jar containing olive oil, shook it up, and if you immediately pour out the liquid, you have a certain amount of really fine diamond in suspension. So now you can either burn off the olive oil or let it evaporate. Now you have a really fine diamond dust. Or you can let it settle out for a certain amount of time. But there is nothing written. This is purely a supposition on my part. And if anybody else can break the code, I am more than happy to listen to how they did this. Okay, now in the 1200s, diamonds did start to appear in royal inventories, and the translation of this is it's a pointed diamond known as the diamond of St. Louis. Now, what do they mean by a pointed diamond? Well, we'll get to that here in just half a sec. We know that diamonds were made starting around 1280. What we mean by made is that we know that they were shaped by man because the original octahedral shape was changing. And again, they did this by hand holding them and moving it back and forth on an iron plate using diamond grit and being handheld. So here on the left, you have your octahedral diamond crystal. The sides of your crystal, the sides of your crystal between the base and any side of the upper part of the pyramid in a natural diamond crystal, it's 54.75 degrees. If it changes from this, we know that that diamond had been changed by man. So they have been made. These are also known as point cuts or writing diamonds. And the reason they call it a writing diamond is that you can imagine any one of these being set in a ring. And now you can scratch your initials or modern day graffiti into just about anything you want. If you take a tour through some of the European castles or even some of the cathedrals, if you look in the furniture very carefully or on some of the windows, you can see where the royals have created royal graffiti using their writing diamonds. Now, your point cut, when viewed from the side, this is what your diamond crystal would look like as a standard diamond crystal, and this is what it would look like coming from the top. Now we start changing, and the side angles, and you can see how the optics are gradually differing and changing. Now you have to remember, these folks did not understand the laws of optics. The only law they understood was the angle of reflection was equal to the angle of incidence. And that was due to an Arabian mathematician who showed this between 8 and 900 AD. But as far as dispersion, refractive index, and all those other factors, they had no clue about. By the 1300s, the trade routes had starting to get established out of India, and you could either go over land or over water. And diamonds were making their way to Europe in such quantities that they started the cutting centers in Venice, Antwerp, and Nuremberg. So we know that diamonds were really beginning to get a foothold. Also in the 1300s, not only were the cutting centers getting established, but you have the development of the table cut. And basically all a table cut is your point cut with a facet off the point. Nobody really knows how this came about, but it is strongly suspected that what happened is that you get a octahedron out of the ground. It has a damaged point. You grind it off, make it flat, and this way you can give your sovereign now a perfect diamond. Now, over a couple of more years, maybe the other side, the other point got damaged, and they put in a culet facet. The interesting thing about the culet facet, it served two purposes back then. Number one, it allowed your eye to focus on the center of the stone. And number two, it actually increases the brilliance by about 5% or so. So how does this change the optics? Well, here's your point cut with a 55-degree side. You take the same stone, put in a flat table facet, and notice how it changes the optics when you view it from the top down. Now, when you put in a culet facet, you give your eye a chance to focus on that, I'll say, optically flat spot in the center of the stone, and you could appreciate the sparkle and the beauty of the surrounding facets. Now, while I was studying all of this, I would do a graphing of the brilliance. On the left here is a table cut stone without the culet facet. Notice when you put in a culet facet, the brilliance goes up. By the way, this is a chart of your brightness on the left versus how much the diamond is tilted across the bottom. So you can see that with this culet facet on the bottom, mathematically, you actually do get an increase of brilliance all the way across the board. Incidentally, to show you what we're striving towards with the modern brilliant cut, this is what your standard modern brilliant cut looks like in diamond. So you can see that the brilliance, especially from head on, is much higher. And also you get a lot more brilliance as you tilt the stone. So this is where we're at right now in the 1200s, and this is what we're striving for in the 20th century. Now in the 1300s, you start with your table cut, and if you throw some extra side facets on it, you get the single cut. So this is in the late 1300s. So here's your table cut, face up and from the side. And now with the single cut, you can see with the extra side facets, you get a lot more brilliance. And by the way, this is actually one of my more favorite cuts, exceedingly simple, yet it returns a tremendous amount of brilliance and has a lot of scintillation to it. So here's your table cut on the left, your single cut on the right, and you can see the slight differences in the charts. Let me go back one. And then again, we can compare it to the standard round brilliant. Now in the 1400s, we have development of the scaife, which is what they call the grinding surface, the iron plate that you put your diamond dust on and use it for cutting. Now here is a carving from the entrance to the Diamond Cutters Guild in Antwerp. And you can see your diamond cutter here. He has a diamond mounted on some kind of a wooden tool. You can see that he's pumping his treadle with his foot, which is allowing the table to rotate much faster. So this allowed faster cutting. Now, because of this previous picture, what he is using is what a gem cutter would call a dop stick. And now possibly the jam peg. Now this is a device that's used even today, especially in Asia. And you can see that by putting your diamond at the end of your stick and then putting it in the various holes, you can get different angles on your stone. Now, symmetry is also possible. Imagine if you were to put a collar of wood around your dop stick and make sure it's securely fastened so you can just jam it on tight. And let's say you make that shape of your jammed on wood an octagon or a hexagon or a square or a triangle or any shape you want. You could rest it against a flat surface, maybe down here, and now you can get better symmetry. We have no proof that this is what they did, but it would not be a major leap of the imagination to see that they could have possibly done this. Now, in the 1400s, cleaving was discovered. Notice I have discovered in quotes. Back in ancient India, the way they told whether a diamond was a diamond or some other stone is that they would put it between two heavy rocks and smash the two rocks together. And if it broke apart, it wasn't a diamond. You can imagine how many diamonds bit the dust because they just happened to fracture along a cleavage plane. However, when I say here and discovered, I'm talking about for jewelry purposes. So here you have a dodecahedron diamond crystal on the left, and if you cleave it, you get this piece of diamond off the top. And with a few extra facets, you can get this pattern. And this is a diamond in one of the royal collections in Europe from the early 1500s. So you can see how you could cleave a dodecahedron crystal, add a few extra facets on the top, and now you have something that you can use for jewelry. You can do the same thing with a hexoctahedral crystal. You can cleave the top, you can cleave it thin, such as the top, you can cleave it thick. And if you view it straight down, this is the shape you get. Now this shape is going to be very important here in just a couple of minutes. Now in the 1400s, we also have these goofy little things of diamonds called hogbacks, basically rectangular in shape. And when viewed from the end, it's basically two triangles joined together at the base. And from the side, you just get this odd shape. So why these hogbacks? Well, if you take your octahedral diamond crystal, and now we are in GemCAD, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to mathematically cleave this thing. All right, so I'm going to cleave it, And you'll notice I have now cleaved it in half. Now I can cleave it again. And notice I have me one each hogback that looks just like the picture. So I do one cleavage here, another this way, and another down here, and I get 4 hogbacks from a single octahedron. Now, the hogbacks were used in many different ways. Here you have different shaped hogbacks. Yes, you start with your standard hogback and you grind it to fit. Now, the reason these are black is because using the hogbacks, the angles aren't appropriate for brilliance. And as a result, with the black backing, no light coming through the backside of the metal, your stones look black. So here is a signet ring from the late 1400s. And here is St. Michael's cup from 1532. And you can also see the use of different hogbacks and the type of crystals, especially in his breastplate. Okay, also in the 1400s, we have development of scaife and cleaving. We also get the rose cuts and the pendeloque, and we won't spend any time in the difference between the two cuts, but basically both can be flat on the bottom with a semi-triangular top. A pendeloque cut, one of your best examples is the spoon maker or the Kasiki diamond that's in the Topkapi Museum in Istanbul, Turkey. And here's a side view of it. So it's very flat, and you have these triangular facets up along the top. It has good brilliance, but little fire. And you will notice that it has a metal background behind it to try to get that light to bounce back through the diamond. And incidentally, this is not too much bigger than actual life size. Now, as far as your rose cuts, you have your single rose cut, or you have your flat back, and then your roughly triangular facets and shape on the bottom. You can also have a double rose cut. 2 famous diamonds that are emblematic of the double rose cut is the Florentine, probably cut in the late 1400s, certainly no later than 1510, a remarkably beautiful stone for not understanding the laws of optics. But you can see how it starts from a hexoctahedral crystal. Doesn't take much imagination once you take a look at the crystallography to see how this was created. Another famous double rose cut is the Sancy. This is in the French crown jewels, and you can view that even today in the Louvre. Okay, in the 1500s, the scaife was improved. So in the 1400s, you have something foot powered. In the 1500s, you have this device created. You have an individual turning a rather large pulley, which goes to a very small pulley underneath your rotating table. You have your erstwhile assistant standing by to daub your olive oil and diamond grit on your cutting platform, and while your diamond cutter does his thing cutting. Now, ladies, for those of you that are out there, history says that the person turning this wheel is the diamond cutter's wife. So not only did they, not only would you have to clean and cook and take care of the kids, but you'd also have to operate your husband's equipment. And hopefully this will work. Okay, you can see, here's the close-up of it. All right, in the 1500s, the Portuguese conquered the city of Goa here on the western coast of India. And why is this important? Because it now provides them access to the 2 major diamond mining areas in India. And now they can pretty much go in and open up the market. If you take a look at portraits of royalty in the 1400s, as like this one up here on top, if you blew this portrait up, you would see at most 2 diamonds. Now here from 1575, There's over 50 in this young woman's bodice and even more in her tiara. So diamonds became more numerous. The Portuguese opened up the floodgates and the race was on amongst European royalty, the biggest and the best and the most. Now, because you have more diamonds available, you can experiment more. And they started playing around with angles and sizes of facets and facet patterns. Now, in the 1600s, we have sawing. So you take your diamond octahedron, and before they would completely grind away this top portion. But now, if you sawed it, you could get 2 stones out of it. And this actually increases your diamond supply by 30% because you're no longer grinding off this top part. And it did depress prices for a while. Now, some people think that diamond sawing started in 1604 because of De Boot's treatise here, his history of gem and lapidary. And in it, he draws a picture of this, I call it a bow saw. It has a wooden frame and a bronze blade, and it used powdered grit and water. Some people think that this was used to saw diamonds. Well, let's take a look at that problem here. Yeah, bronze blade, maybe. The powdered grit, if you bothered to translate the Latin from this treatise, it actually talks about this material called, I believe it's Smyrna or Smigdara. Regardless, it is emery from one of the Greek isles. Emery is made of what? Roughly 50% corundum and 50% country rock. That is not going to saw through a diamond. What this saw was actually used for was cutting up your slabs of marble or agate and turning big pieces into smaller pieces. It was certainly not used for sawing a diamond. You can imagine, by the way, using a saw of this size, and you can see scale by the size of his hand. This thing is probably a good 2.5 feet long. Good luck in cutting a small diamond crystal with it. However, in 1681, Professor Grew from the Royal Society in Britain was describing this process. And down here it says, our European jewelers, when they split one, referring to the diamond, they take a very small iron wire and having daubed it with oil and powder of diamonds, draw it upon the diamond by a tool to and fro like a saw, so long as is needful for that purpose. So now we have a definitive method of actually sawing through a diamond. And that was in 1681. And that date, by the way, becomes very important. In another presentation I have on the genealogy of the Hope diamond, which was cut from the French blue diamond and subsequently cut from the Tavernier blue diamond, people think that there were pieces cut off from the Tavernier blue diamond that made other famous small diamonds. But that would have been in 1671, 10 years before this even came out. So it can be shown that there are no sister stones from the recutting of the Tavernier blue. Now, in the early 1600s, we have what's known as the Mazarin cut. Now, notice how things have been fancified a little bit and a little more complex. So you start with your single cut, you're changing the angles on the pavilion, size of the table facet, you're throwing in some extra facets along the side. Now, the Mazarin was not a true cut. It was more just a style. Now, in the 1600s, we also have brooding, where you are rubbing one diamond against the other to make both round. And you can see how they would do that using the 2 sticks. Now, the box is used to collect the diamond dust because that would be reused later for cutting your diamonds. So the Mazarin cut in the mid-1600s was also modified to become the Peruzzi. And again, you can see some modifications in pavilion angles, side cuts, and a different facet pattern. So here is the single cut. We go to the Mazarin, and then we go to the Peruzzi. And you can see how brilliant the Peruzzi is in compared to any of its predecessors. Then we have the Wittelsbach in the late 1600s. We know it was cut sometime prior to 1664 because that's when it formally appears. What do we call it? Again, we don't really care. You know, a Peruzzi with extras. As a gem cutter, because of these facets around the cullet, I'd call it a stellar cut. Maybe you could call it the first of the brilliant cuts because it has very much a brilliant style facet pattern on. But we don't really care what it's called. We just need to marvel at the complexity of the cut and what they could do given the technology at the time. Now, the recutting. A few years ago, Lawrence Graff bought the Wittelsbach, had it recut, lost a few carats in the process. But what have we lost by the recut? Well, if you take a look at the original, and this is a blown up provided to me by either Sotheby's or Christie's, I forget which. Notice how perfect the facets met on the pavilion. I'm thinking that perhaps either the diamond cutter had the eyes of an eagle and could get this level of precision on this roughly 34 karat stone, or this is the first evidence of magnification having been used during diamond cutting. Now, you might ask yourself, how would you prove that magnification was used in the cutting of the Wittelsbach? Well, my answer is have no idea. However, now that all of this original cutting has been erased, just because we don't understand the language of the diamond doesn't mean it didn't have a story to tell. And now that story is lost forever because, in my view, the stone has been historically vandalized. And we lost an awful lot of historical information because of it. Now, the cutting of the French blue occurred in a 2-year time period, 1671 to 1673. So here you have the Tavernier blue, here you have the French blue. Notice how complex the cutting pattern is on the French blue. This piece was truly a work of art. And again, the laws of optics wouldn't be quantified for another 40 years. So Jean Piton, who was tasked by Louis XIV to convert the Tavernier blue into something that he considered a lot prettier, Piton did this purely by instinct. And you can see here on the left, you can see how the French blue fits into the Tavernier blue. It's an amazing piece of work. And what, to me, not only did it embody a lot of religious significance, we could go into why it's seven-sided and everything has a sevenfold symmetry, but that's a later presentation. But not only was he able to accomplish all of that, but he got an almost 60% yield converting the Tavernier blue into the French blue. The man was a genius. And then here again is the French blue inside the Tavernier blue. All right, and here we're back to our picture of him cutting. Now, here we have the Regent diamond, cut in the early 1700s, 1715. At the time, it was the vogue that your main angles for both crown and pavilion were set at 45 degrees. Now, what angles am I talking about? That is these shaded angles. I wanted to recreate the Regent diamond. However, in my modeling, if I made these 45 degrees in order to emulate the facet pattern, the volume of my model is too great, which means my stone is way too heavy. So even though it was the fashion at the time to cut these facets at 45 degrees, It was not used in the cutting of the Regent. By the way, the Regent back then was considered the world's most perfectly cut diamond, and it could probably hold that name even today because it will balance on its culet facet just fine. So here I wanted to duplicate the Regent. What am I going to do about it? I don't know what the angles are. Well, if you do your research, Tillander says that these main angles were cut approximately 42 degrees. Morel says they were cut 45 degrees in accordance with the historic patterns. And Bari just emulates Morel. However, when I was studying table cut diamonds, I noticed that if you have your culet facet here, you have a reflection of that facet off to the side. And if I change the angles here, I have a certain distance at 45 degrees. But if I change the angle to 42 degrees, it moves ever so slightly closer to the center of the stone. This difference can be measured extremely precisely, actually to within a quarter of a degree. And because these two are different, your distance here at 45 is different than at 42, I determined that the main facets on the pavilion were cut at 41.75 degrees. And now I could throw that into my modeling, and voila, I can now cut the replica. All right, so in the 1700s, we go from the 1600s to the 1700s. The old mine cut, kind of a spin-off from a Peruzzi style, but the table is much smaller. The angles on the pavilion are changed as they are on the crown. The facet pattern is slightly different. So this is the results of all that experimentation over the previous 200 years, now that diamonds have flooded into Europe and a regular trade has been established. So here is your old mine cut in relation to the others. Now we go into the 1800s. We have mechanical bruting. We can now mechanically rub one diamond against the others. This side is rotating very quickly. The other side's rotating very quickly. And they're set up so that they rub together very nicely. You have your little vacuum device here sucking up whatever diamond grit comes off. Also in the 1800s is the development of the old European cut. Notice, all previous to this, most of your diamonds were cut as squares because they didn't really know how to make a perfectly round diamond. But now that you can brute your diamonds mechanically, you can now make them perfectly round, and hence you have the old European cut. Also in the early 1800s, the advent of steam power. Here is a line drawing showing the recutting of the Kohinoor diamond. And what you have now is a leather belt going to a steam engine outside the facility. So you keep the noise and everything else outside. And it allows much faster cutting because your scaphe is rotating at far higher speeds. So you now have a mechanized method for powering your scaphe. Also in the 1800s, you have phosphor bronze sawing. So rather than using a wire to split your octahedron or subsequent crystal, you can now do it mechanically. All right, pop quiz. We're in the late 1800s. Here's a question I like to pose to folks. Anybody care to hazard a guess as to what the answer is? Okay, no guesses? The development of the incandescent light. It changed how diamonds appeared. Here on the left, you have the, I believe it's the Hall of Crystals in Versailles. And you can imagine prior to the advent of the light bulb, it being lit by all of these hundreds, if not thousands, of softly flickering candlelight. Now all of those can be replaced by a few incandescent lights. So you now have, rather than multiple point sources of light, you have very, very few, if not a singular point source of light. And the old mine cut and the old European cut were not designed for that kind of lighting. It changes the internal reflections. Plus, your incandescent light right here has a different spectrum than a candle flame. And now your diamonds that were cut in either the old mine or old European style, they appeared lifeless and dull. So something had to give. Now, late 1800s, we have Henry Morse and his American cut. Late 1800s, the European cutters cut to maximize weight. Morse designed it to maximize brilliance. And he came up with these angles for the crown and pavilion mains. So your pavilion mains at 41 degrees, your crown mains at 35 degrees. And this was so popular that the proportions and angles were used by Tiffany and other high-end jewelers for quite a few decades. Now in the early 1900s, you have Marcel Tolkowsky and a seminal work on diamond design, and you can read the title here. And he was very meticulous, mathematically calculating the angle of incidence, the angle of reflection, all these optical properties with diamond, doing ray tracing that if a ray of light enters a diamond at one angle, it comes out over here. How do we maximize that return of brilliance? And just for your reference, I consider 1919 to be the beginning of the modern cut when it comes to diamond cutting. Anything prior to that is more historical, and this is just my personal opinion. So you don't have to agree with me, that's just my position. So here's what Marcel Tolkowsky calculated to be the ideal cut for a diamond. Now let's compare these to the American cut. The pavilion mains, Morse says 41 degrees. Tolkowsky says 40.75, a whopping quarter degree difference. Crown mains 35, Tolkowsky 34.5, half a degree change there. No big deal. So you can see that the American cut was also built on by Tolkowsky to come up with his version of the standard round modern brilliant. Now let's compare the two mathematically. If you were to just do a quick glance at both charts to see which one is the more brilliant, you'll see that the American cut is actually roughly 5% overall more brilliant than the American brilliant cut. Why the American cut wasn't adopted was primarily because Tolkowsky was European, Morse was American, and most of your diamond cutting took place in Europe, and God forbid an American usurp the paradigm going on at the time. All right, so the old European cut gives way to your modern brilliant cut. Now, after 1919, I personally consider this to be the modern era. Symmetry is possible. We know everything we know about optics, brilliance, scintillation, refractive index, dispersion, you name it, we know about it. We can now harness that and all these different cuts that have been developed after 1919 with the Asher cut and the Princess cut and all these others. The equipment has changed. Here we show a scan of the Lesotho Promise diamond, where you can scan the exterior and get a very accurate exterior model. Then you can scan the interior. You can look for the inclusions, and you can take your computer and program it for maximum yield or maximum color or shapes or whatever. And this you can now do on computer. It's all mechanized. Imagine that historic diamond cutter toiling in his candlelit workshop, holding a diamond by hand, wishing he had this kind of stuff. And yet, what he could produce back then will rival, in my eyes, anything we could do now. But now it's all mechanized. Back then, it was purely by guts. Where's the romance? It's gone. It's artificially created. Thank God for De Beers. A diamond is forever. But if you can understand the history of where the modern cuts came from, you can use this as a selling point in the future, since diamonds are forever. I mean, most of them are 1 to 2 billion years old. That you could use this as a sales tool for your customers. So, in summary, I've taken you all the way back 3,000 years ago to 1000 BC, where we used diamonds for drilling through sapphire beads and carving and polishing diamonds and being used in jewelry in their raw form. We looked at the effects of trade. Once the Portuguese conquered Goa, the flood of diamonds into Europe opened up. And now you can start experimenting with different diamond cuts. And rather than using computers, you use your own intuition to make these raw stones out of the ground into these objects of beauty. We've talked about the technological innovations, anything from the progression of the scaife to the light bulb to the use of computers to take over just about everything. And there you have it. And that is how you get from, again, another first century Roman ring to the centenary diamond. And here, by the way, are the brilliance charts. You start out with the point cut diamond, your standard diamond crystal in the upper left, and going down to the lower right, you have your modern round brilliant. Here's my contact information. Does anybody have any questions?
We can unmute now, Clemens, if it's okay. And anybody who has a verbal question, it's a little quicker than scanning the chat.
Boy, either I put them all to sleep or I was very thorough. Take your pick.
Well, I think we're going to opt for very thorough, Scott. I want to thank you on behalf of everyone for your time and your historical energies that you've shared with us, and your love, obviously, of the diamond. And I think that hopefully some people who've watched this have learned a little more than they knew before about the evolution of the cuts. I know Clemens is a grandmaster cutter himself, and I'm hoping that he enjoyed it as well, as some of the others in the audience who have some cutting knowledge. But thank you all very much for coming. I really appreciate the fact that people will spare their time, their knowledge, and their expertise to help educate the world of gemology. So in that regard, Scott, thank you.
My pleasure. And by the way, I noticed in the
Now,
comments, which I have to block off when I'm giving my talk, that Bruce Geller did come up with the right answer with incandescent lighting. So he passes the test.
so you're going to send Bruce a diamond?
Well, maybe a replica.
There you go.
Sounds great.
Good on you, Bruce. So just for everybody's information, I mentioned it briefly at the beginning. You may not have all been here then, and some of you were here then, are gone. But anyway, to celebrate 3 years of intensive programming, we'd like you, the viewers, to have a vote in what we have for our celebratory 3rd-year anniversary program at the end of November. And what I'm suggesting is that we represent an already recorded program that was one that was the most interesting to the audience. So you have a chance to vote. to send into my email address what program or what subject we've done that you wanted to see again, or perhaps you missed and you wanted to see. The one that gets the most votes, we'll ask Julian to dig out of the archives and we'll have it presented. And we'll also have an open forum at the end for suggestions. We'd like to get some suggestions for 2024 programming. I'm of the mind that we might want to do some consecutive programming on famous gem localities in the world. But again, I'd like to hear from you what you'd like. It's not my program, it's actually your program that I'm providing. So thank you very much, Clemens, for being our savior and allowing us to broadcast and record today. So kudos to you.
My
And
pleasure.
thank you, Scott. And if just as a quickie, Scott, can you, when we're finished and shut down, can you communicate back with me on Messenger? I'd like to have a little chat with you about something.
Not a problem. I've also noticed that Antoinette made a comment, and I don't know if everybody's seen it, but her statement here is, I have strangers stop me and ask to look at my circa 1890 ring centering a natural pearl with an old European cut, and they exclaim they've never seen such gorgeous diamonds. Antoinette, never have that diamond recut, because you are erasing history. There's more magic in that stone than you will find in any other jewelry store around. Oh, I can't hear you.
Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, Antoinette is muted, I see.
She's trying to talk, but
I know she's working hard.
Can you unmute everybody, please? Clemens?
Hang in there, Antoinette. We're working on it.
Let me see if I can unmute her. I think I can only mute everybody, not unmute.
Oh no. It's a one-sided power control.
Unmuting Antoinette would be like opening the box of Pandora, I think.
Oh, almost, because Antoinette is a person that likes to talk. Can you hear us, Antoinette?
Ray, you can unmute yourself, because I just unmuted me.
I can't unmute.
Antoinette, look in the lower left corner of your screen, and you should see a mute and unmute button. Either that or your microphone is turned off. There you go. There you are.
I've had that ring for over 40 years. It was the engagement ring my husband gave to me. I will never recut those stones. I agree with those strangers who stop me. It's not whether it's a new cut or a brilliant cut. It's the character and personality that stone shows to you. And there are fabulous cuts in every period, but my old European cuts in that ring are truly amazing stones. That's why strangers stop me. So don't discredit a stone because the dealer or the seller says, well, they're old European cuts, as if he's apologizing. Look at the stones. Thank you.
And Scott, I'm sorry. Thanks, Antoinette. I think there's one of the problems in the evaluation world that I've seen is that if you have a European cut versus a brilliant cut or an Asher cut, there's a reduction in value of something like 25%. And
exactly.
I've even seen evaluators suggest to people who have larger European cuts, it would be worth it to recut it, make it more beautiful, and add to the value, even though it'd be a smaller carat weight. And I'm not exactly in agreement with
those troglodytes have no poetry in their soul.
It depends upon the stone itself, the inherent character of what went into the cutting of that diamond, not its period, not the category name they give it. Use your eyes, for crying out loud. Does the stone speak to you? If so, take advantage of getting the discount and have something you'll love much more anyway.
Anyway, just I mean that's an interesting aside, but the point I think that is taken is that perhaps if we listen to Scott, we should value the older cuts and appreciate them as our. I think the problem a lot of people don't realize what skills are involved in cutting, and I think we've got a small little window into the difficulties and the challenges of cutting. And I've said in talks that I've given that that the good cutters are a cross between artist and technician that is rare in the real world, and that's why good cutters are few and far between, and we should honor them and respect them and appreciate what they create.
Here, here.
We're so used to getting the finished product, and it's like people saying, "Well, milk comes from bottles, stones come from jewelry stores." This is one of those things that hopefully through programs like Gemquest, we're helping to educate people a little bit better, even those who are already educated, by adding little bits and tweaks of knowledge to broaden what we know about the world of gems. And that's been my challenge in presenting this
And
programming. So all of you, I'm giving you homework. Please think back or think forward as to what you'd like to have for anniversary program next month in terms of a rebroadcast and one of your favorite subjects, and uh, hopefully we'll get some kind of a consensus on the most popular one, and I'll let you know when I send out the invitations, the final invitations.
Ray, we do have a question from Delia and Damien. And the question is,
Go
was
ahead.
it a gradual transition to computer-aided design? Are there any old school gem cutters left? I can only speak for myself, but yes, it was a gradual transition to computer-aided design. You have to remember, I grew up with the stubby pencil. Uh, Computers weren't really coming into the forefront till the early 80s. But as people realized that the computer capabilities increased, we did get this computer-aided design. And I do use the computer a lot because I do a lot of my own cuts. I develop my own cuts for a given piece of rough. However, um, sometimes I just go off on a whim. I let the stone talk to me and it tells me what facets I need to place. Now, are there any old school gem cutters left? I think you're probably speaking to one of them because for 15 years, I resisted going to using digital equipment on my faceting machine. My concept was, in order to understand how and what the old time cutters did, I had to cut the way they did as much as humanly possible. So no, I'm not going to handhold the diamond, and I'm not going to go out and pound diamonds into grit. I'll buy my grit, thank you very much. But going through the trials and tribulations that they did made me a better cutter and certainly more old school. Because if you want to understand how and why the Tavernier blue got turned into the French blue, one thing I'm going to do here real quick, let me go back to a slide in my program. So if you'll bear with me for just a minute, let's see, I'm going to share my screen real quick for any of you folks that really care. I will do my utmost not to bore you. Oops, wrong one.
Just while you're doing that, Scott, excuse me, Robin, are you still with us? Okay.
Yes, I'm still here.
I was wondering, while we're waiting for Scott to come up with that information, did you have any little things to share as well?
Oh, I didn't tonight, sorry, but we do have two replicas that we have on display in the vault of the Kohinoor, which Scott cut in cubic zirconia. So I thought I was very pleased to be able to listen to you talk tonight.
Well, I'm thrilled. I'm assuming you're from the Natural History Museum in London?
I am indeed, yes.
Outstanding. Yeah, when Alan Hart was the curator, I had an open invitation to come and dust the attic with all the specimens you had up there. Yeah, it was rather fascinating. But what I want to show people is that here you have the French blue inside the Tavernier blue. As a cutter, I can take a look and see what he did. I can also interpret why he did what he did. So for me, this is a very, very interesting journey because I am now going back, let's see, let me do my math, 250 years. I am getting into the mind of Jean Piton, the crown jeweler, who cut the Tavernier blue into the French blue. I can tell you why every facet on the French blue existed looking at this model, because I am seeing what he is seeing. I am thinking what he is thinking. And to me, that is an absolutely magical concept to truly understand. So I'm going to stop sharing now. But I have found this an interesting journey just because I can see what these folks have done in the past, and not only what they've done, but why they've done it. And it makes for a very personal connection.
Okay, well, then I think we're going to close off the recording, and thank you all for staying with us and learning and sharing. And Scott, if you could messenger me when we're done, I'd appreciate it. Thank you